Welcome to Stroke Forward. My name is Marcia Moran. For the next 40 minutes or so, we are going to talk about things that stroke survivors, or any brain injury survivor, deals with. If you look at me today, you probably don't see a person who had a stroke, but I feel it. My body functions differently. Do I think I will get back to 100%? Yes, because to think differently is to admit defeat. We will talk to all sorts of people who have been there, from survivors to caretakers to doctors, nurses, therapists, friends, and family who have seen us at our weakest. They have cheered us with their victories, no matter how large or how small. How did we get here? That's what this show is going to tell you. Reverend Dr. Beverly Hall is a retired United Methodist pastor from East Ohio Conference. In 1999, Beverly had her first stroke as she was getting ready to move to Oxford, England, to do independent doctoral research at Oxford Brookes University. She had her second stroke while in the UK. Upon her return to the US, she had 28 TIAs and in 2004 was finally diagnosed with a rare artery of the brain disease, Moyamoya. In 2007, she flew to Stanford Medical Center in California and had 2 brain surgeries in 4 weeks. The 5th week, she was back at her church, conducting a wedding and preaching. Beverly is married to Gerald Hall, a 30-year retired Air Force reservist. They met online in 1993 and married after seeing each other only 4 times in person. They just celebrated their 28-year wedding anniversary. Beverly, known as Rev Bev, has 2 grown daughters from her first marriage. She has 1 grandchild who will be 3 in November. Beverly graduated from Youngstown State University in Ohio, the Methodist Theological School in Ohio, with a Master's in Christian Education and a Master's of Divinity, and St. Paul's School of Theology in Kansas City, with a doctorate in ministry. Her hobbies include puppet ministry, Christian clowning, and reading science fiction. Her husband is a sci-fi writer. She now lives in North Carolina on a 3.5-acre farm, raising chickens and lots of vegetables and berries. I'm delighted to introduce Pastor Beverly Hall today. How are you doing, Bev?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Marcia.
Okay. I have heard, you're welcome. So I've heard that you've had a lot of TIAs and a couple of strokes. So can you tell me what happened?
Yes, in 1999, I was getting ready to move from my parsonage, and we were renting a storage unit because I was beginning the trip to Oxford, England to do independent PhD research. And so we were going to be loading the storage unit, and that morning, just before Mother's Day, I had my first massive hemorrhagic stroke, left me totally paralyzed on my right side, and I couldn't talk. The only thing that I could say at that moment was, I can't breathe. Now I could breathe, but that was the only thing that would come out of my mouth. And so my husband, fortunately, was with me, and he recognized that I was having a stroke. He called, got me to the hospital in enough time, and then they began the process of evaluating, and they gave me a psychological test and said, boy, you have a lot of stress factors in your life. And I said, yeah. And they said, we would have had a stroke a long time before you did. But I was in my late 40s. I didn't think that I was a candidate for a stroke, but I didn't know what was going on. I did recover. I went ahead with my plans to go to England. I arrived in England in a wheelchair, and 2 years later walked off the plane carrying my own luggage.
Wow.
I did my own rehab while I was in England. I cleaned houses for a living. And when I was on a ladder dusting a chandelier, I fell off that ladder and had my second stroke in 2000.
Wow.
And so they told me not to pick up anything heavy, try to relax, try to take it easy. I was living with a family for 6 weeks while I was recovering from that stroke. They didn't give me any suggestions on new medications or anything. They just said, don't lift anything over 10 pounds, which was a little hard to do because of the vacuum cleaning and that kind of stuff. But most of my clients that I did 9 houses plus the village hall every week, plus went to school full time. Anyway, most of my clients wanted me to come back, and they bought extra vacuum cleaners, put them on each floor, or they would themselves put it on the floor that I was going to be working on, one floor at a time.
Wow.
So that worked out really well for me. I continued to do that. And when I got back to the States, then I began to have TIAs. I had 28 TIAs.
Wow.
In the period before I was diagnosed with Moyamoya, and I was diagnosed in 2004 with this rare artery of the brain disease called Moyamoya. Sounds
Okay.
like a Hawaiian drink, but it isn't.
So 28 TIAs, that is incredible. So most people, I think, have 1 or 2.
Mhm.
So is it the Moyamoya that caused you to have so many?
Well, it's the Moyamoya that caused me to have the strokes, plus the TIAs, plus I have a tremor in my left hand that I'm on medicine for now. But again, Moyamoya was all these clusters of symptoms. It was the disease, not the stroke. And most doctors looked at me and said, oh, well, you have a stroke, you have high blood pressure, etc. And they forgot to see the zebra that was right there. They were looking at the horse and saying, oh, well, all these things are symptoms of a stroke. But in reality, the stroke was just another cluster of the symptoms that I have from Moyamoya.
Okay, so we've talked about Moyamoya for a while now. Can we explain what that is to us?
Yeah, it's a rare. When I first had it, it was 1 in a million
Wow.
people that get it. Now it's 1 in 250,000 because they're identifying more. But it's an artery of the brain disease in which your brain looks like a puff of smoke, and that's what Moyamoya means in Japanese. Your brain looks like a puff of smoke on an angiogram. When they see it, they don't see any white blood vessels. They just see this gray mass. And you're supposed to see white blood vessels in your brain when they do an angiogram. So my whole left side was gone. I had no white blood vessels, and I had just a little strip at the top of my right side of my brain that was gray. I did have, I mean, I did not know that I was that sick, but I did have a doctor tell me I had 2 years to live in 2004.
So that's not very long to live. And yet now it's 2022.
Yeah.
So what happened? Why did you live so long?
Well, what ended up happening is I did not give up. I was at a brand new church because the former church that I was serving said they didn't want a pastor to die in office, and they asked the bishop to move me. So he moved me that year in 2006, like I was supposed to die then. And so the new church, my district superintendent said, please don't tell them you're sick. But I had to tell them because my husband had taken a job in Columbus, Ohio, and it was too far for him to come every day home.
Mhm.
So I was going to be alone a lot, like 5 days a week alone. So
Mhm.
I needed to make sure that somebody else knew that if I didn't show up for my regularly scheduled office hours, that I needed to somehow let people know why I might be on the floor. So I told my supervising committee, my SPRC, and they said, well, let's go to the congregation. So they talked about it at the congregation level, and the congregation said, we want you to be our pastor for a long time. We love you. We want to do a healing service.
Mhm.
So I bought 10 vials of anointing oil and put them in each pew, and they all anointed each other and prayed for each other, and then they all came down and anointed me. About 2 weeks later, I was on the computer and I just casually typed in Moyamoya. Up pops a video of two women from Wisconsin going out to California to Stanford to see a Dr. Gary Steinberg. And they had surgeries for Moyamoya. Now,
Really?
doctors at OSU said there was no surgery, there wasn't anything that they could do about it. Just keep me calm. They recommended that I quit my job because it was stressful. I said that would be much more stressful, but besides that. Anyway, so I didn't quit. I kept going. And anyway, the congregation, I was a little worried that they might think I took matters into my own hands and didn't give God a chance. But they said, no, that was a God moment that you found this on the internet. So praise God. So I contacted Dr. Steinberg's office and he said, get out here now. He looked over my scans and he said, you're going to have another massive stroke soon.
Mhm.
And if you don't get out here now, you're going to die. This is going to be the killer. And I said, oh, well, I had just gotten appointed to that church. We were celebrating our first Lent together and our first Easter. And I said, as soon as Easter is over, this was in February, and we had just started Lent. I said, as soon as Easter is over, I'll be out. He said, don't make it one day later. So what I did was I went ahead and came out in April, and I had the 2 brain surgeries in 4 weeks. The 4th week, I flew home. I did a wedding and preached that following Sunday.
Wow. So you said it's 2 surgeries. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had bilateral, which meant both sides.
Okay.
So what they do is they take the arteries out of your scalp and tie them into your brain.
Okay.
And so I had one surgery that was 12 hours long, and the second
God.
surgery was 18 hours long.
Oh my
They
God.
freeze you, so you're down to about 70 degrees so that it doesn't bleed a lot. And they do the surgeries and then stitch you back up, but they don't use stitches, they use staples. So my head was stapled. I have an exclamation point here, and then a backwards question mark here as a scar. This side, the right side, which is weird because I had my strokes on the left side and I had nothing on the left side. But the right side was a problem because the arteries in my brain were a lot smaller and more difficult to patch. So
Mhm.
that's why the bigger scar, the longer surgery, etc. But the first week you're out there, you do tests. The second
Mhm.
week you have your first surgery. The third week you have your second surgery, and the 4th week you have your tests, and then you leave. And so I flew home. back to Ohio because I was originally from Ohio. My family couldn't come out with me. My oldest daughter was experiencing cancer for the first time, so she was undergoing chemo. My youngest daughter was defending her PhD dissertation and couldn't come out. And my husband was being called up active duty Iraq. So again,
you have a string of bad luck there. So, is your family okay?
Yes, they are. From what I know, my husband served in Desert Storm, Iraqi Freedom in Afghanistan. He retired after 30 years in the military, so he's doing well. We're in North Carolina now because he had relatives in the area that we're living in. And so it's been an exciting journey. We just celebrated our 28th wedding anniversary. My youngest daughter got her PhD in autistic research, and she lives in California now with her husband and my only grandson. And Porter, my grandson, will be 3 in November. And I did get to see him once in person when I went out there to visit. And they're doing fine too. My oldest daughter survived cancer, but got on opioids because of the pain medications. I did tell them not to give her any because she has an addictive personality like my first husband, who died at age 38. And anyway, making a long story short, she is estranged from us now. So I don't know where she is. I don't know if she's alive or dead. I don't know if she's in prison. If she's well, I pray that she is. And I pray that somehow, someday, we'll be able to reconcile and I'll be able to see her again.
Yeah, so I'm so sorry that things didn't turn out the way you would like. And I will have her in my prayers as well.
Thank you. Her first name is Courtney.
Okay.
Courtney.
So I'm going to go back to when you were in England, because you talk about a time that's 2 years long. You talk about showing up in a wheelchair and walking off the plane when you came back. So that sounds amazing to me. What happened?
Well, I could walk, I just couldn't walk long distances. So when I got to the house, I was able to walk. I crawled up the steps because it was difficult to navigate steps, but I managed. And then some folks in the community that I was living in, I lived in a little village called Horton-cum-Studley. And those folks were very nice to me. I lived next door to the local Anglican church, and they kind of took me under their wing, and they asked me if I needed money. And I said, yeah, I could use a few extra bucks because it's extremely expensive to live in England.
Right.
And anyway, they were very kind and generous, and they started to talk to people about me. I did apply for the position of cleaning the village hall, which was a brand new Millennium Hall that they had built in the year 2000. So they knew my record, so I kept getting clients to clean for. Sometimes I would iron for people. I'd iron their clothing. Sometimes I would polish their silver, but most of the time I just simply cleaned their house, which gave me an opportunity to do rehab. Because in dusting, you're making motions and moving, furniture around and, cleaning and all that. I did that. it was very difficult at first. I was exhausted most days, but
Mhm.
I managed, kept going.
Yep. So, first of all, I think you are really courageous for cleaning houses and finding out that the courage actually helped you get better is amazing to me because I don't know if I've been able to do that after my stroke.
Yeah, everybody's different with their strokes.
Mhm,
I was very fortunate because even though it always felt like I was just half a person,
mhm,
um, 'cause my right side was very weak and I kind of dragged my right leg around for a while. But the walking, because Oxford is not a drivable city, you have to either take buses or taxi cabs or bicycles into Oxford. You cannot drive a private car into downtown Oxford. And I
mhm,
actually had to catch several buses in order to get up to Harcourt Hill, where my college was that I was attending. And so people would drop me off at a bus stop, and then I would take the buses, and then I would walk, and then, all that. So all of that helped with my rehab. And for the most part, I would have a backpack. I
mhm,
would buy groceries on the way home and um, put them in my backpack and then take them home with me, that kind of stuff. That's what you did because, you don't have a large refrigerator in most homes in England. And so you have a smaller refrigerator, so you have little milk containers and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, you did what you had to do. And the home that I lived in, the person was a East Ohio Conference pastor with me, and her husband was a villager in England. She had met him when she was on vacation,
mhm.
fell in love with him, married him, and then he died of cancer before I could get over there. So her home needed to be sold. So I did my job too well, and within the first 5 months, I was homeless again. But the village, it takes a village to raise a Bev. So they helped again, and some neighbors took me in, and I rented a room from them. I had a 5 by 7 foot room. I was able to take a few pieces of furniture with me from the house that she sold. And then she was buying another house in the village, but then it needed time to fix it up.
Mhm.
So eventually, about 6 months later, I was able to stop renting and start then going ahead and living in the house that she bought. It was an apartment over 4 garages in a close, basically. And so the person who owned the garage that was kind of underneath my living room was
Mhm.
just moving in, and he met Anne, the lady that owned the house, as she was repairing the house and painting it for me to come and move in. And they met and got married. So the second guy from this remote village she married, and they still own that flat
Mhm.
of the garages. He sold his house, and they have a house in a neighboring village now. And I was able to stay with them the last time I was in England, which was a couple years ago.
Okay.